Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another week of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in, and today we should have a fantastic show to start the week. We are going to start off recapping Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals, where the Oilers comprehensively forced a Game 7 in Edmonton. And then we are going to preview that Game 7 happening tonight. Should be a fantastic one. History can be made either way between these two teams, so I'm looking forward to starting the show off with those segments. Then we look at the updated Conn Smythe odds. Should the Oilers win, will Connor McDavid ultimately win or lose, actually? And then the Golden Boot odds for the Euros have been updated. This list is a little bit skeptical, but I am going to give it to you guys, even though there are some names on there that I do not think are getting off on the right foot in this tournament. And we conclude today's show with a very special segment. For the first time in the history of the show, I will be doing a deep dive into a certain player in fantasy football to go over their stats, their career highlights, and also what attributes might make you want to roster them or shy away from them. That player will be named in that segment. But without further ado, let's jump right into the show. Before we begin, I do want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, to any show on the network for that matter. Also, if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as well. So anything you leave there is greatly appreciated. If you want to leave even a question, a comment, or concern based on prior episodes or even a segment that you see today, do consider that as well, and it will be answered at the beginning of the next episode. But without further ado, let's jump right into the show, and we begin today's show with some hockey. Never thought it would get to this point, but yet here we are. We are discussing a Game 6 Oilers win, and now we are looking ahead to a Game 7 tonight. It sure seemed as if this series was dead and buried after Florida went 3-0 up, but it just speaks to the Edmonton Oilers' moxie and heart and desire to win games. They never say die. They have had an incredible record when they have had these consecutive losing streaks, and so it's nothing we shouldn't have expected of them. But let's just jump right into recapping Game 6, and then we are going to preview best two words in sports in Game 7. Starting off with my fantasy stars from Game 6. Again, all Oilers, mainly due to the fact that there was sheer dominance from this squad in Game 6, and Florida just could not cope with it. So Darnell Nurse, there's a guy that we've always talked about on this show as someone who has had his fair share of criticism, but in this game he really stepped up. He had 1 goal, 2 plus-minus, very important as a defender that your plus-minus is positive, and a 6.5 fantasy point score at the end of the day for Darnell Nurse. Another huge factor in tonight's game as well, as he could be tasked as being one of the top line defensemen to close it out for Edmonton. Another player who has had a fantastic role in the series, one of Chris Knoblauch's experimentation kind of guys, in Warren Foegele, had a goal and an assist, a 1 plus-minus and 7 fantasy points. I think tonight he can be a huge factor, mainly due to the reason that Chris Knoblauch needs someone who he can rely on as a guy who can rotate in and out of lines, and that has been Warren Foegele in these playoffs. He can step up to a top line, he can step down to the third line, he's found his home in the second line. So whatever happens with Warren Foegele tonight, he can certainly have either a positive or a negative effect on this Edmonton squad. And last but not least, we have to acknowledge the play, especially in elimination situations, of Stuart Skinner. Only 1 goal against tonight for a sterling .952 save percentage, 8 fantasy points. And Stuart Skinner, yes, he as well as Darnell Nurse has faced a fair share of criticism, but in elimination games, he has had a sterling record. And if it weren't for Connor McDavid, Stuart Skinner would be a shout for the Conn Smythe Trophy, mainly because of the fact that in elimination games, he never says die. He really elevates his game. He knows what's at stake. And so Stuart Skinner needed to be on that Fantasy Stars list. And notice how one player in particular is absent from this list. This is one of the first games ever in the Connor McDavid era where Connor McDavid himself did not register a shot, a point, anything in this game. This goes to show that Edmonton is locked in right now, and they have all the momentum in this series. And that's all you need going into a winner-go-home game, a winner-take-all game on the road, where historically, in the history of North American professional sports, especially in recent memory, road teams have had the benefit of the doubt, and they've won many road games, especially in Game 7s, and so that's something that Edmonton can take. But honestly, right now, I remember earlier in the show when they were down 3-0, me talking about how there's a mental barrier surrounding the distance between these two teams, the longest distance between two teams in Stanley Cup history. And so, Edmonton, that was the key for them. Not only find their game again, get back to what they do best, but also figure out a way on the flights back and forth between Edmonton and Florida to lock into that mindset of, we aren't done yet, guys. Whatever they needed to do, now the mindset has shifted. The Panthers are kind of talking like how the Oilers were when they were down 3-0. They're trying to remain upbeat, but the mood, you can see in the players on the ice, the mood is completely and utterly shifted. Edmonton players just seem so energetic no matter what in every facet of the game, whether they're in the offensive zone or the defensive zone. In every single facet of the game, the Edmonton Oilers just look more aggressive. They look more hungry to win. They look more together as a collective, and that's something we were saying about the Panthers in this series. The Panthers were the more well-rounded team. They were the collective unit that got here centered around a team identity. And we couldn't say the same about the Oilers because they were relying on Connor McDavid to take them to new heights. And now, everyone around McDavid, the fruits of that, especially showing in Game 6, has really elevated their game to prove that Edmonton is never down and out. And I really think that they have a fantastic chance of being yet another road team to go out there and win Game 7 and hoist the Stanley Cup for the first time in over 30 years. Now let's look at the betting odds, because the betting odds for tonight's game show the story a little bit of how this series has shifted. Edmonton right now is at minus 105. Florida's at minus 115. So as you can see, it's really a toss-up. A little bit favored towards Edmonton, even on the road. As always, the total is 5.5. And so, if you are betting on this game, I think the evenness of this game and how bookmakers look at it really helps you in any regard. You could pick either team and be fine with whatever happens. I would personally stick with Edmonton. I think Edmonton right now has all the momentum going forward, and they just look like a team that really is interconnected. In terms of if you're still playing daily fantasy hockey for the last game of the season, here's what you need to know. McDavid, still the highest priced player on the market in terms of budget at 11.6K, projected to have 19.1 fantasy points, and I could definitely see him doing that. His first ever Game 7 in a Stanley Cup final. Hopefully it's not his last, but it definitely means a lot to a player like him to be in this situation, and I expect him to come out with a bang. In terms of Florida Panthers who really need to step up, I'm looking at Sergei Bobrovsky because he fell off a cliff somewhere along the lines in this series. He's projected to have 12.3 fantasy points and he goes for 9.8K tonight on the market. But Sergei Bobrovsky definitely needs to find a way to find a way back into the series through his goalkeeping or have his defensive structure kind of set up in front of him. I think that Sergei Bobrovsky definitely needs to have a huge Game 7 if Florida had to have any hopes of winning this series. And then another Oiler who I'm really looking at to step up because he is one of the longest tenured Oilers since before McDavid and Draisaitl were even here. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, he has seen the journey. He knows how long it took to get to this point from all the different teammates he's ever had. Now here he is in a winner-take-all Game 7 in the Stanley Cup Finals, I think he's going to have a huge game. He is the glue that holds this Edmonton Oilers team together due to his longevity in this squad. And so he's projected to have 7.7 fantasy points, and he will go for 7.6K. And then last but not least, another Florida Panther who has come under his heavy share of criticism, Carter Verhaeghe. He looked very lost in Game 6. Whenever he picked up the puck behind the net, that's how the Panthers generated a lot of their looks on goal, picking the puck up from behind the net, passing them back out to the center of the ice. Carter Verhaeghe is often tasked with that. He just looked lost with the puck. He kept on losing the puck in dangerous situations for Florida. And he's held scoreless for these past couple of games. And I think that in order for him to be seen as yet another clutch playoff performer, especially for a Florida team that just relies on a collective, he definitely needs to be one of the guys who says, hey, I'm going to take this game over. He's projected to go for 8.8 fantasy points, and he goes for 8K on the market. And so Carter Verhaeghe is someone I'm really, really looking at through a lens for the Florida Panthers, because they definitely need someone who can distribute the puck, who's not scared of Oilers penalty kill, because I guarantee you, every single man advantage or shorthanded position the Oilers find themselves in, they are going to be very aggressive. That's not changing. The Oilers' power play and penalty kill has been absolutely outstanding, not just throughout the postseason, but in the past 3 games to even get to this point. So they need to find someone to break that Oilers' success up. They need someone who can really help facilitate what the Florida Panthers' offensive game plan is, and I think that should be Carter Verhaeghe. But overall, looking at this game, I said the Oilers would win in 6, and I'm not changing my prediction now that it's going to 7 games. I think the Edmonton Oilers will win this game to just look like the better team. When all is said and done, when we look back at the series, whoever wins tonight, they'll make history. Florida's either going to be looking at a first franchise Stanley Cup, and the Edmonton Oilers are looking to be the first team since World War II era to be down 3-0 and win the Cup. And so I just think right now Edmonton is on the right side of history. They have a lot going for them in this game. They seem to have figured out how to contain their anxiety or their fears throughout the flights. They've changed to a mindset of positivity, and they look like on the ice. And so I'm really looking forward to this Game 7. But that should just about do it for this Panthers-Oilers Stanley Cup Madness recap/preview. Coming up next, we're going to be looking at the updated Conn Smythe odds. When all is said and done, who will take home the coveted Conn Smythe trophy? We will be right back with that segment, sticking in the hockey world.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a very exciting second segment coming up where I'll be looking over the updated Conn Smythe odds now that we are in the Game 7 realm. But before we get into that, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can also leave them there, and I will get to them at the beginning of the next episode. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into the second segment of today's show, looking at the updated Conn Smythe odds. When all is said and done, who will be the NHL Playoffs MVP? Now, this list has been very volatile because of the fact that A, you have two generational superstars on one team, in McDavid and Draisaitl, and then a super team of collective all-stars and above-average players in the Florida Panthers, who, while they fill the list, can never hold a candle to what Connor McDavid and Lee and Draisaitl have done in this postseason. And so, I think that's very reflective of what we see in these final Conn Smythe odds before Game 7. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Obviously, number one on the betting list right now is McDavid at minus 5,000. In fact, he's the only one with those kinds of odds. The rest of the list is blank to 1 odds. McDavid is the only one who is a clear and steady favorite. And I think that's a just assessment of what Connor McDavid has done in this postseason. He's breaking records set by the great one who came before him in Wayne Gretzky. He scored a ridiculous amount of points. He's just proving his importance and his collective energy that really bolstered this Edmonton Oilers squad when they were in a very tough situation. He did it in the Western Conference Finals. He did it in the semifinals. And he's just maintained his level of dominance. And he just does Connor McDavid things at such a grand scale. I think that Game 6, obviously, he did not have a shot or point in that game. First time in quite some time, or maybe even ever, that Connor McDavid has not recorded a shot on goal or a point for Edmonton. It just goes to show that his presence alone really guarantees that everything centered around what the Oilers do best will be alright. They've grown to the point where they don't necessarily have to rely on Connor McDavid. They just rely on the fact that he will do what needs to be done, but they also need to realize that they are elevated around him. That is what's so great about a player of Connor McDavid's caliber, is that he can have an off day, but his teammates always know that his energy and his physicality and what he brings to the ice just makes them that much better. And so that's the reason why Connor McDavid is the well-deserved favorite, and win or lose should lift the Conn Smythe Trophy. Looking at the rest of this list, you have in the second position Alexander Barkov, who in this tough stretch for the Florida Panthers definitely has looked like the best Florida Panther in these consecutive losses. And so I could see a point where, you can say that if Alexander Barkov scores, let's say, an overtime or game-winning goal tonight, the effect of that goal could reach voters and they could say, hey, Alexander Barkov, when his team needed him, stepped up. But right now, I just don't see any way in which Connor McDavid doesn't get this trophy. Alexander Barkov definitely deserves it because in a very, very tough, scary situation for the Florida Panthers, he has really elevated his game, trying to bolster this squad. But right now, he's not Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid is literally, in many respects of the word, dragged this Edmonton team to where they were. He had consecutive 4-point performances, and Alexander Barkov has just not been that level of player. He obviously scored, and who knows if that offsides goal, maybe if that offsides goal goes in, Florida might have come back and won that game. Who knows? That's the whole mystery of how voters will look at this, but I think that if Florida wins, there can be a case for Alexander Barkov, especially if he has a fantastic game tonight. And then looking at Sergei Bobrovsky at 100 to 1, his odds plummeted because he was in the number one spot for quite some time, Sergei Bobrovsky. but over these past couple of games where he's been shipping in goals, his stock has fallen drastically. And I don't even think a shutout tonight would even help him. I think that Sergei Bobrovsky, when you're a goalie in the Stanley Cup Finals, you really have to have at least 2 consecutive series where you are the catalyst for what your team has done. And Sergei Bobrovsky does have that, but in the Stanley Cup Finals, when you're a goalie and you're your team's best player, let alone in a tough position where you are the last line of defense, you have to be solid in every single game in order for voters to take notice of you. For the first 3 games, voters probably were thinking Sergei Bobrovsky is going to win this thing in a cakewalk because of his utter dominance in net in the first 3 games of the series. But now that the Oilers have figured him out, that's the reason why Bobrovsky is dropping drastically down this list. And there are a couple of people who are, in my humble opinion, could be above him. And so I could see Sergei Bobrovsky dropping further down the list when all is said and done. Like right before game time, his odds plummet drastically. And then you have Matthew Tkachuk. Obviously, he's also been a stellar player throughout the playoffs for Florida, not as much in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think he'll be more remembered for that goal line clearance in the Game 5 loss than anything else he did in the Stanley Cup. He's just been so quiet, and for someone who's viewed as a leader along with Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk just has had a very disappointing couple of games. And now let's get to the Oilers, who have seen their stock rise. And one player especially in Zach Hyman, who, if he had more point production, could definitely be challenging McDavid right now for the Conn Smythe Trophy. He has had 16 goals in this playoffs, leads all players. So that definitely goes for him, but I think what's lacking for him is his level of point production. He is seen as more of a finisher than a distributor of the puck. He's one of those guys who stands around the net, waits for the puck to come to him, and he just finishes it off. And so that's probably why he's not as high as some other names on this list. But I can definitely see a world where if Zach Hyman had, say, 5 or 6 assists, he could definitely be in the conversation. And then, of course, Leon Draisaitl. Leon Draisaitl hasn't really had a standout performance in the Stanley Cup Final, and that's definitely hurt him. Obviously, we talked about Leon Draisaitl in the playoffs in the past, where obviously health was a big factor for him. He was very unhealthy 2 years ago. You could see it in his style of play, and you're kind of seeing it now, what with his diminished production levels. And so I think that Leon Draisaitl is one of those guys who maybe in a different year, if he was the star of the team, then he would win this award handily. But right now, Leon Draisaitl does not have that level of prowess yet to utterly take over a race. And right now, it's McDavid's to lose because of the fact that he's breaking records. He's the fulcrum of this team. He's what makes it tick. He's making history. This is his first time in the Stanley Cup Final as well. It's been a long journey to the mountaintop, and it would be a perfect end, both win or lose, for McDavid to come away with a Conn Smythe Trophy, because it will clearly show that his level of performance is unmatched in today's NHL. But that should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up next, we are transitioning from hockey to soccer. We'll be looking at the updated Golden Boot odds for the Euros. And I must say this is a very skeptical list, but we'll see how you guys react to it. We'll be right back to talk about that list.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you liked that hockey-heavy start to the show. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case going forward, as tonight is the last game of the NHL season. Kind of bittersweet, but we still have a lot of exciting sports to get to, especially what's happening across the pond in Germany in the European Championships. We are going to be taking a look at the updated Golden Boot odds for the European Championships, especially as we get into the knockout stages. This week is the last round of group stage games, so this is going to be a very interesting deep dive into who the pundits think and bookmakers think are the heavy favorites for the Golden Boot. And I must say, when I was looking at this list, I was thinking this was very skeptical. I was very skeptical of who was on this list. But without further ado, I'm here presenting it to you, so make of this list what you will. I'm definitely not beholden to who I see on this list. I would definitely bet someone from outside this list as well. But let's just jump right into it. Interestingly enough, the leading scorer in the Euros is the own goal. It's the own goal. Like yet again, the own goal is leading the race, but there does have to be an overall Golden Boot winner. One person will have to stand alone at the end of the day to claim that award. And looking at this list, there are definitely names who can do it, but ultimately, it's the question of about A, how their team plays, and B, their style of play even. I think that's one of the major things I look at when I look at who leads the list. So, let's just jump right into it. Starting off at number 1, a player who can definitely do it, but it's one of those guys who is mainly faltering due to the overall team play and the system that he's in. And Harry Kane at plus 600. Everyone knows that Harry Kane is a world-class striker. He might just be the best striker in world football right now. But he is being managed by Gareth Southgate. And as everyone knows, Gareth Southgate is not a manager who likes to score goals in bunches. He's very pragmatic. And hey, sometimes it works in tournament-style football, but for the past couple of years, that has been England's downfall. They just have not scored enough goals to kill off games, and by sitting back and allowing teams to dominate possession after they score that first goal, they become much more vulnerable. We've seen it in this tournament as well. Obviously, Harry Kane did score a goal already in this tournament, but he was not encouraged to score more. In fact, he dropped so deep, he dropped so centrally, that there's no way for him to get any service from where he sits on the field. Also, the fact that England are playing so many different players out of position, guys like Trent Alexander-Arnold and Phil Foden, not necessarily playing in positions that suit them, definitely speaks to how this England team is very, very disjointed right now. I think that while Harry Kane, yes, he can be a difference maker, I just don't know if there are enough goals in the squad, especially from how they distribute the ball. I think that the big thing for Harry Kane is he's a service striker. Yes, he can create things on his own, but at the end of the day, strikers do need service, and if you're not receiving any service, how do you expect to put the ball in the back of the net more times than not, especially in a Golden Boot race that can get tighter as the knockout rounds progress? And so Harry Kane at plus 600 is a safe bet, but it definitely gives me pause seeing how England have played in this tournament. Now here's a guy who his role has definitely changed within this team, but definitely can be in the reckoning as the knockout stages go on. And Cristiano Ronaldo. We saw Cristiano Ronaldo play a couple days ago, and he was fantastic in allowing the players around him to really step up. And so that's the question with Cristiano Ronaldo. Is he going to be a goal-scoring threat, or is he going to allow the technical flair and ability of this Portuguese squad to really show, and he's going to stand aside and let other players step into the spotlight? Because Cristiano Ronaldo does create this kind of aura around this Portuguese squad. Yes, they have the technicality and skill to go all the way, sans Cristiano Ronaldo. But with him in the squad, they're a different team. And maybe that affects them in the Golden Boot race. Because of the sheer fact that Portugal right now has a structure and foundation around Cristiano Ronaldo where they can be comfortable without him on the pitch. And so I'm going to have to see how this whole Portuguese setup pans out. They've been playing fantastically well, even when Cristiano Ronaldo is not on the score sheet. So I just feel like Portugal are a new-look squad, man. I think that they are one of those teams that, much like, say, Spain, realize that they can adapt to different styles of play and still be successful. And so going forward in this tournament, I'm really focused more on how Portugal plays around Cristiano Ronaldo, knowing that he's on the pitch, rather than Cristiano Ronaldo scoring goals. And that's the reason why I would kind of fade him, but he can still finish chances at the end of the day. Coming in on third in this list, obviously a guy who might not play as much as he wants to in this tournament, just very unlucky player at the Euros, especially in Kylian Mbappe. Obviously, with a broken nose, he's definitely going to have to be handled much more differently than anyone else in that French squad. He's going to have to be monitored because a broken nose definitely affects you in many different ways, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. So, unfortunately, fading Kylian Mbappe seems like the best move for bettors here. So, it's kind of sad to say that, but he still is a goal-scoring threat should he, once he comes back, look back to his best. But right now, I just think that that broken nose is more of a hindrance than people think. Coming in at number 4, this is a huge shock to me and to many German fans because he, after that first game, has not looked like a player who can lead the line. It's Kai Havertz sitting at plus 1,000. Now, the thing about Kai Havertz is he certainly is a fantastically good player for this German squad because of many different reasons. But scoring a goal certainly is not his forte. Kai Havertz is more known for his movement off the ball to create opportunities for other teammates. And so that is why Julian Nagelsmann thinks of him so highly, because of the fact that he gets a lot of production out of his midfielders. And right now, Jamal Musiala, as seen on the scoring charts, is sitting pretty behind a couple of other players and own goal in terms of that midfield setup for Germany. And so Kai Havertz being the only German player on this list is a little bit weird due to the fact that he's not necessarily the guy who I see finishing off Germany's chances, especially now that they have a target man off the bench in Niklas Füllkrug, who could certainly see a lot of game time in the knockout stages when Germany is in these tighter games and they need someone off the bench. So Kai Havertz sitting at plus 1,004th on this list gives me a lot of pause. I would definitely fade him. I would actually look at Jamal Musiala from Germany as someone who could be a dark horse for the Golden Boot. He's certainly going to be in the race for Young Player of the tournament, but Jamal Musiala, just his goal-scoring ability, now that he's in a system that definitely is to his benefit, along with Florian Wirtz, I think those two are seen as more of a goal-scoring threat than a Kai Havertz, who's mainly viewed as a false nine. Everyone knows that he is going to be the guy who moves the defenses away from what's happening in the midfield. And so that's why I do not think Kai Havertz deserves to be on this list. And then another guy from England who I certainly see being hindered, especially by Gareth Southgate, as this tournament progresses, and Jude Bellingham. Obviously, he was the first goal scorer for England, looked the best player in their game against Serbia. But here's the thing about Jude Bellingham. I think that in an England midfield that is very rife with talent, but certainly underutilizes a lot, Jude Bellingham is getting all of his creative nous sucked out of him because of the fact that Gareth Southgate would rather a guy like Declan Rice try and control the tempo of the game rather than a guy like Jude Bellingham make surging runs forward. And so Jude Bellingham, he's not to blame for what's happening to him. He's not taking himself out of the game. Gareth Southgate is. The system is. Jude Bellingham is meant to be a player that can really help the attack, transitioning from midfield to the attack. And so Gareth Southgate really, really hindering what Jude Bellingham is all about. And so I hope that Jude Bellingham can get back into the goal scoring again, because he might be needed to in the knockout stages. But yet again, this England system really drains players of their abilities and what they are able to do both on and off the ball. And so Jude Bellingham, unfortunately, I'm also going to have to fade at plus 1200. Maybe in the knockout stages we might see more of a attack mind in England, but for now I have to fade Jude Bellingham from what I've seen. And last but not least on this list, a guy who ironically would be the leader in the Golden Boot race had it not been for VAR, Romelu Lukaku at plus 1400. We've talked about him a little bit and how his finishing boots have not been on, especially on the international stage. I just don't see him winning the Golden Boot, especially in a Belgian team that has fascinatingly underwhelmed. And so I'm also fading Romelu Lukaku. Overall, this list, I don't necessarily see anyone on this list really separating themselves in the pack, but it is up to your guys' interpretation. Who do you guys think will win the Golden Boot? Because right now, it kind of is a crapshoot in terms of different players and who might win. So leave your opinions in the comments, if you will. But that should just about do it for this segment. Coming up on the next segment, we are going to do a recap of what have happened in the Euros over the weekend. We had some very exciting games involving some very exciting teams, so you don't want to miss that segment. We'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back to GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you liked that Golden Boot update, because we are sticking with the European Championships with our fourth segment of today's show. We are in the home stretch of today's show, and we had a fantastic weekend slate of games from teams that are considered the contenders for the Euros title, and teams like Portugal and Germany and others like Georgia and Czechia, who have just been really enjoyable to watch in this tournament. I think that you guys will definitely be thrilled to see some different players and different squads represented in my Euros weekend update in terms of fantasy implications. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So the most impressive and comprehensive win for me over this past weekend was Portugal's over a Turkey squad that really showed promise, looking like a dark horse contender, doing well in one of the best games in the tournament in recent memory. A 3-1 win over Georgia for Turkey in their last game. They were coming into this with a lot of confidence, but Portugal just tore them apart with a lot of technicality and flair and creativity from their forward players, and one forward player in particular, a guy who I was really looking out for, and I told you guys all about. Hope you consider rostering him or have rostered him. Bernardo Silva, one of the most technically sound players at this tournament, and when he's on his game, cutting inside and shooting, wreaking havoc on the wings, he is one of the best players in world football. He had 1 goal on 4 attempts. He has 1 block as well, 4 successful dribbles, and an 89% pass accuracy in this tournament. I especially look at a player like Bernardo Silva to grow into this tournament. Right now, as they finish up their final group game. Portugal is definitely looking like one of the most confident, swaggering team of this tournament. I definitely hold this Portugal team in a high regard, mainly because they're not centered around a guy like Cristiano Ronaldo, who holds so much aura and presence and weight in world football. They believe that different players can also contribute. Kudos to Roberto Martinez for getting the best out of the squad. I'm really, really intrigued to see how this Portugal team develops into this tournament, because I think they can go very far. Switching from tournament contenders to tournament darlings, let's look at a player who is really incredible for a Georgian squad that has just played some can't-miss football. And Georgi Mamardashvili, one of the first goaltenders I mentioned in these recaps, he has 15 saves in this tournament, including 11 saves in their draw against Czechia. 3 punches off of corners, just fantastic goaltending. In that performance, that draw against Czechia, 11 saves, 3.19 goals saved above expected. Outstanding from a goaltender who, on an international stage, is really making a name for himself. I'm shocked that he hasn't been contacted by a big club yet. He also had a fantastic domestic campaign at Valencia. Georgi Mamardashvili. Georgia might have a short stay in this tournament when all is said and done, but it's not for lack of trying. They are one of the most exciting teams to watch in this tournament. They're entertaining. Their end-to-end style, their defensive frailties make them an enjoyable team to watch. And I'm just so happy that we get to see so many different nations represented in this tournament. Now let's switch to a much more, shall we say, aging squad in Belgium. They needed a victory over Romania. They got it. A 2-1 victory, a 2-0 victory over Romania in a group that's looking to be one of the most competitive in the championship so far. But let's just go over some of the Belgian players, starting off with Kevin De Bruyne, who made a huge impact in this game. Kevin De Bruyne, obviously one of the best midfielders in the world, and he was on his game over the weekend to seal that result. 1 goal in 7 attempts for him. Only an 80% pass accuracy, very low for him, with 6 successful dribbles. And look at this. He's taken 11 corners already in this tournament. So, if you're looking for someone to get you a quick assist in your US fantasy squad, look for Kevin De Bruyne should Belgium advance to be your guy. He still can do it at the highest level, and he's certainly helping this Belgium squad, the remnants of the golden generation, if you will, kind of stick together as this tournament progresses. And they really need it, as he kind of is the reason why they are what they are in this group. And so they definitely need to bolster Kevin De Bruyne's performance, because that's the key to success for Belgium, in my humble opinion. But another midfielder who I feel is getting a little bit underestimated in this tournament, in Yuri Tielemans. I think that Yuri Tielemans, mainly due to the fact that Belgium's golden generation was so talented, might have gotten passed by. He kind of came up in the midst of that golden generation, not a Belgian golden generation player proper, but kind of a protege of the golden generation. And so he's kind of fallen by the wayside, but his play certainly hasn't. 1 goal, 2 attempts so far, 90% pass accuracy, so a little bit better than Kevin De Bruyne's. His goal came from outside the box as well. I just think that Yuri Tielemans is a very interesting player to watch in the knockout stages progresses, because he can be a catalyst for the Belgian side that might need some of its younger quote-unquote players to step up. And so I'm really looking at Yuri Tielemans, not just in real life, but for your fantasy squads, respectively, to be a guy who you're confident in rostering, mainly due to his abilities on and off the ball. I think that he's known for his outside-the-box goals, so that's another reason why potentially you can roster him, especially in the knockouts. So look for Yuri Tielemans to be a threat for your fantasy team. And then, last but not least, in terms of the Georgia-Czechia game, Patrick Schick, he has been such a well-respected player for this Czech Republic team over many years. Had a fantastic Euro 2020 campaign, scoring the goal of the tournament in that tournament. And this tournament, he's looking to pick up where he left off. Obviously, kind of a rough domestic campaign on a Bayer Leverkusen squad where he was not seen as a top-level player for them, seen as more of a commodity coming off the bench for them. But in this tournament, he's looking to find his feet again. Getting that first goal will surely help him as Czechia looks to make it as one of the 4 best third-place teams, or even in the second-place position in that group. 5 successful dribbles for Schick, 1 goal on 7 attempts for him, and a 73.5% pass accuracy. Obviously, Patrick Schick could be an option should Czechia advance to the knockout stages for your bench because of the fact that he has goals in him. But for now, I'm just happy seeing a player of Patrick Schick's caliber get going in this tournament because he can definitely be one of the better strikers heading into the knockouts. And just a guy who I wanted to highlight as Germany prepares for the knockouts, and a guy who's definitely seen as a fox-in-the-box kind of poacher striker if you're looking for someone like that, and Niklas Füllkrug. Niklas Füllkrug might not play as many minutes as he deserves. He's one of those guys who is seen as a player who can come off the bench and have an immediate impact, a super sub, so to speak. But in the knockout rounds, Germany's going to be tested like it hasn't before. They could face Spain in the quarterfinals, Portugal in the semifinals if they make it that far. So they need someone off the bench who can add that level of impact, experience, and depth that Germany might so desperately need in a tight game when the going gets rough. And so Niklas Füllkrug is going to be the guy that they're going to rely upon. He scored a fantastic goal yesterday against Switzerland, and he already has an outside-the-box goal in that game against Scotland, also off the bench. So while Niklas Füllkrug might not be a player who is coveted in terms of minutes played, he can be coveted in terms of goals scored. He cannot be denied. Julian Nagelsmann might use him as an emergency plan kind of weapon, calling on him when Germany is in a time of need. And so that's the reason why I wanted to highlight him, because strikers are going to be at a premium in Euros fantasy as the tournament progresses. And so picking up a guy like Füllkrug who can score goals in bunches, especially off the bench, and is just a huge target man presence, and is also a cheaper option than higher end strikers like Kane or Lukaku, then you should certainly consider picking him up. But that should just about do it for this Euros weekend recap. I hope you liked that. But coming up next, for the first time ever in the history of the podcast, I am going to be doing a deep dive into a fantasy football player. Who it is, you're going to discover right after the break. We're going to be looking at his stats from his career and how he can be an asset to you in terms of fantasy, but also what traits might make you want to shy away from him. We will be right back with what should be a fantastic ending segment on today's show. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Fantasy Sports Network. We are in the last segment of today's show, and it should be exciting. This is the first time I've done a segment of this kind before on the show, And I'm really looking forward to doing these over the next week and maybe in the future as well as we get closer to the fantasy football season and the NFL season as well. We are going to be doing a player profile. Now, what is a player profile? It is a deep dive into a player's fantasy stats over the years, potentially looking at their fantasy career, last year what they did well in, looking at certain traits and attributes that could help you decide whether or not they are the right choice for you at certain positions. We are going to start off in the QB position. It's a huge hint for who today's player of focus is. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. The player that we are going to be focusing on today is one of those guys who is going to be highly coveted at the QB position. So drum roll, please. The player in question is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, he has been one of those guys who, especially because of his dual threat ability, is a guy who has really become one of the most coveted fantasy QBs in the past couple of years. I really think that this can be the year where Lamar Jackson really elevates his status. He has the skill position players around him now. He has Zay Flowers, a young receiver who I really like. OBJ, well, he's gone now, but Mark Andrews coming back from injury. Always a reliable target for Lamar Jackson. And so I'm really excited to see how Lamar Jackson plays with one of the best receiving cores he's had in years. Much like he had last year, where he truly got back to 2019 form and winning MVP as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the fantasy player profile of Lamar Jackson. And throughout his career, he has had a fantastic points output. 1,713.3 points in his career as a fantasy athlete. His best ever season was 2019, his first MVP season, where he put up 415.68 points with 36 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions in that year. Last year was definitely a lot like that as well, as he took home MVP as well. Also, last year, let's just go over some of the statistical things where he excelled in. It was the first top 3 finish he ever had at the position in terms of fantasy since 2019. Amongst all quarterbacks last year, he ranked first in rushing yards per game, third in red zone carries, and fourth in rushing touchdowns. He was 10th in passer rating from a clean pocket, and he was 6th in adjusted completion. His average draft position going into this upcoming season is 32, so kind of a mid-round pick. His projections for next season, he is projected to throw for 3,513 yards, 26 touchdowns and 11 picks. On the ground, projected to have 738 yards and 4 touchdowns. But here's a stat that is kind of worrying about Lamar heading into next season, especially considering the fact that in a QB market that's ever evolving, you want to find the next big thing. Last year, he had 6 weeks as one of the top 6 guys at the QB position in terms of fantasy, but he also had 6 where he was 16th or worse. So that is the volatility of a guy like Lamar Jackson. Now, the reason why I chose Lamar Jackson as the first player is because of that hit or miss ability. I didn't want to choose a guy who, like Josh Allen, who I'm actually going to preview tomorrow, where you know his stats are going to be good. You know he's going to always be at the upper echelon of fantasy QBs. I wanted a guy who proves he can be that, but also falters in certain areas. And so, looking at Lamar Jackson, the traits that stand out: he is a fantastic dual threat quarterback. No matter who is in the backfield, whether it's a running back by committee or now they bring in Derrick Henry, who they really think can make an impact even as he gets up there in age, Lamar Jackson will always have that ability to take off on the run, whether it be design, whether it be breakdown of a play, whether it be an RPO, what have you. Lamar Jackson will always have that ability. The big question surrounding him has always been, if you surround him with wide receiver talent on par with some of the better wide receiver cores in the NFL, what would he be able to do with it? And last year, he really kind of stepped up to the plate as a thrower, in my opinion. Obviously, it didn't all pan out. In the AFC Championship game, he looked very bad. And especially in the playoffs, Lamar Jackson has had a lot of questions surrounding him. But in terms of fantasy, when you look at the regular season, Lamar Jackson has been one of the more consistent fantasy QBs. Yes, that stat is kind of worrying and gives me pause, where he did have 6 finishes where he finished at the QB 16 or worse position. But everyone knows how Lamar Jackson just needs that level of consistency around him to really tone into what he does best. And no matter what, the Baltimore Ravens will always be a Lamar Jackson-centric team. They know what he's good at. They know that he can elevate certain players in the regular season at the very least. And he can also be a guy who gets a lot of yards. And so, the reason why Lamar Jackson is a player who you should be fascinated by in terms of fantasy and might want to pick up rests on that. If we just look at the regular season, Lamar Jackson is better than stellar. Now let's get into why I think that Lamar might not be a good fantasy QB in certain situations. And the answer might shock you. Mark Andrews. I think that Mark Andrews is Lamar's go-to receiver, and being a tight end, and not only being a tight end but also being that go-to guy, is really difficult. And as we can see, it has taken a toll on Mark Andrews over the past couple of years. He's been beset by injuries, mainly due to the fact he gets a lot of the target share for this offense. And so, the big question surrounding Lamar is he going to now be able to trust a guy in Zay Flowers who's still growing? As we saw last year, he made a little bit of a mistake in that AFC Championship game. So that's the huge question for me. Will Lamar Jackson, when he's throwing the football, when he's put in a situation to throw the football, will he be reading and processing the field in a way that's not always centered around Mark Andrews getting open? Or will he look to Zay Flowers more and really make the Baltimore Ravens more of a vertical threat, thus allowing him to put up the points you need for your fantasy football team? That's the only reason why Lamar Jackson right now, to me, is a player who I might fade. For all intents and purposes, in my humble opinion, if I had to pick a quarterback, Lamar Jackson would definitely be on my list. He would be right up there with the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes of the world, the Dak Prescotts, at least in terms of fantasy. But the one thing giving me pause is, can Lamar Jackson prove that he's a quarterback willing to elevate his game around the game of his wide receivers? Because you definitely have a better structure there for him. Zay Flowers could be a star in this league. Mark Andrews already is. Rashad Bateman is a fantastic wide receiver 3 option to have. But right now, I want Lamar Jackson to prove to me that in any given situation, whether or not you have all your wide receivers at your disposal or if you're down a man, can you prove to be someone who is not stuck in their own ways of, oh, this guy is already my superstar, I'm just going to give it to him and hope he produces? Because at some point in his career, Lamar Jackson is going to have an even better quarterback room, maybe in the near future. But right now, with what he has, he needs to prove that these are the guys that he wants to go into battle with. These are the guys he wants to throw the football to. And that's the key for Lamar Jackson to find that level of consistency that not only says, I should be in the top 5 fantasy QB discussion for next year, but for 5 or 10 years along the line. So, with Lamar Jackson, it could go either way. You could be getting a guy who is consistently in the QB5 discussion every single week, or a guy who later on as the season wanes down, he could start losing that ability. So that is why I decided to choose such a polarizing player as Lamar Jackson, my first player to kick off this style of segment. I hope you guys enjoyed it, but that should just about do it for today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I've been Chris Shepard. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Thank you yet again for tuning in. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the show. It's a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network. Consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud, another way to support the network as well. Anything you leave is greatly appreciated. But thank you guys yet again for tuning in to today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with yet another exciting show.